Well, welcome to today's session. My name's Emily Springer. I'm a graduate learning specialist at National University, and I'm thrilled to be able to have Dr. Linda Bloomberg come back to present today. Mixed methods, a consideration for dissertation research. Couple of brief housekeeping items as we move into our skill up session for the night. We are recording our session, and I will provide a copy of the session to all of our registered attendees. You can still find our skill ups in our Graduate Studies Support Center skill ups section, and you can also find us on our YouTube channel. Absolutely want you to utilize the chat for today's session. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. And you're more than welcome to enable your closed caption. Should you want to do that, you can hover over the bottom of your Zoom screen and enable them. If you need something from the technical side of things, find me in the chat. For the best flow today, let's remain muted unless called upon. And I think that about does my housekeeping items, Dr. Bloomberg. So from here, I am going to pass it to you.
Thanks so much, Emily, as always, to you and your team for hosting these skill up sessions for our students and for our faculty. And as always, for those of you who have not done my webinars or attended my webinars previously, Emily knows this. I would love this to be very interactive, and I will be stopping for questions along the way. And then at the end, we'll have a space and a time for additional questions. So keep writing down your questions. If you have them, you can pop them in the chat. Emily will be looking for those. And you can also speak out at the appropriate times when I stop for questions. And I love getting questions. So please feel free to ask whatever is on your mind. So today we're going to be looking at mixed methods, but really from the vantage point of using mixed methods as a dissertation research methodology. And there's a lot of talk around this, and I really hope that this webinar will drive home a lot of the questions that are swirling around in people's minds and some of the uncertainty around mixed methods as a viable methodology. Because remember, there are lots of questions about mixed methods. It's a very complex process. It's a very complex approach, much more so than just qualitative or quantitative research, which are complex in and of themselves anyway. So when one is doing research at the very, very beginning of one's process, one is always trying to determine what is the most appropriate research methodology, being qualitative or quantitative or even mixed methods. And from there on, going to design your study within one of those methodologies. Each of the methodologies has its own specific research designs. For example, qualitative research has case study, phenomenology, narrative inquiry, ethnography, etc. Quantitative has correlational research, experimental research, etc. And then mixed methods is, as you'll see in this presentation, a mixing of some of these methods, but in a very, very logical, systematic, and thoughtful way, not just deciding to plop together certain methods and calling it a mixed method study. You'll see throughout this webinar, and I hope that at the end of it, you will acknowledge that the process is much more complex than some people initially think. So I just want to talk a little bit about some of the facts that, some of the features of mixed methods that make it a methodology in its own right. First, the debate about mixed methods started from a focus on one specific version of triangulation, which was methods triangulation. That is the combination of qualitative and quantitative methods. So that's what the debate about mixed methods and the origination of mixed methods began with. The concept of triangulation means that an issue is considered from at least two or more perspectives or viewpoints. And Denson in 1970 and again in 1978, that's Norman Denson, one of the key figures in the field of qualitative research, introduced the idea of triangulation as the combination of methodologies in the study of the same phenomenon. Those were his words. And with the development of mixed methods as a specific research methodology, triangulation became to be not only understood as a strategy for confirming the findings from one method with the findings using another method, rather triangulation was aimed at a much more comprehensive understanding of the topic, including discrepancies and contradictions that arise in the findings. So let's take another little broad and at the same time deep dive into the main features of mixed methods, which I refer to as the overview. Basically, this is the systematic use of both qualitative and quantitative methods of data collection and data analysis in the same study. Mixed method seeks to integrate or combine the two forms of data and the findings intentionally and systematically in the design of the study. The key words here are intentionally and systematically, not haphazardly. It's not an afterthought. It's a very much part of the setting up of the study, which is based on the intentionality and the systematic process that is applied to combine the two methods. Mixed methods also permeates the entire research process. It's not simply a procedure or a single point. It occurs throughout the study, starting with designing the study, conducting it, reporting findings, and even interpreting those findings. There are a number of possible levels at which mixing can occur, and this is going to become very clear to you throughout this webinar. The strategies that are used for mixing at those levels depends on the research purpose. That's really the bottom line. What is the purpose of the study? And once that is determined, one can start laying out the strategies of mixing the different methods. Overall, the research approach, mixed methods, is multidimensional and very comprehensive and complex. And I say this because the researcher must of necessity take into account the priority, timing, pacing, weighting, and point of interface of the study's components. And that might seem a little bit fuzzy and abstract to you right now, but you'll see what I mean as we move through this webinar. There's a lot to unpack here: priority, timing, pacing, weighting, and point of interface. So I'm going to try and make clear what all of these mean and what really needs to be considered to set up a rigorous and authentic mixed method study. I want to make clear that just having two methods present in the study or collecting two types of data does not make your study mixed methods. And that is written about by all of the mixed methodologists that I have referred to in this presentation. And you'll see there will be a reference list at the end, that all of the authors, all of the researchers who are experts in this field will agree that it's not just a simple mixing of two methods or combining two types of data. Mixed methods is really a much more complex approach to research, offering a holistic and multidimensional understanding of complex social settings and problems. So just to be clear on what I mean by integration, I've added these three quotes, direct verbatim quotes from three authors who have written quite extensively about mixed methods. And I'm just going to quickly touch on them so that you have an idea of what I mean by integration. Guterman and Melina Zorin and colleagues write, the integration of qualitative and quantitative research has long been considered the defining feature of mixed methods research. However, achieving integration means more than meeting a definition of mixed methods research. Rather, integration is what helps researchers maximize the value of this powerful methodology. Fetters and Melina Zorin state the following: there seems to be no widely agreed upon definition of integration. Many authors refer to integration as alternative or synonymous language with the term mixing in the context of mixed method research. And Cheek and Obi, who write in their most recent book, which is a 2023 publication and actually an excellent publication, which I have right here, they write, the core component is the primary method in the study, which must be conducted to a standard of rigor. In other words, the core component is a complete method in its own right. In contrast, the supplemental component or components only make sense in terms of supplementing the core component in some way. So if we let that sink in, integration is not just taking that beta, that egg beta, and swishing it up. It is really thinking about what you want to achieve based on your study's purpose and how you're going to integrate the two methods, qualitative and quantitative, both in terms of data collection and data analysis, in a way that makes this a true mixed method study. So there are two concepts in mixed methods that are really important. Firstly, the researcher must bring two sets of data together, and to do that, tables and graphs are used to illustrate a side-by-side combination of the findings. The researcher examines the joint display to draw conclusions about the insights that emerge from comparing the two sets of data. These insights allow the researcher to develop what is called meta-inferences, from the combined data sets. And the researcher must report the findings that are greater than the sum of the parts. That's another very important idea here. That is not just a set of disparate parts, but an integrated whole, where the sum is greater than each of the parts on their own. So just before we get to drilling down into what qualitative research is, I just want to open this up for literally 2 minutes to ask Emily if any questions have surfaced, because we're now going to go into some of the features of qualitative research and quantitative research just as a refresher, and then we're going to look at some of the more prominent mixed methods research designs themselves.
Okay, well, at this time, there hasn't been something that has come up, bubbled up yet from the very opening.
Okay, that's fine. I just wanted to give anyone a chance if there was something on the tip of their tongue or a burning question. But let's move on, and I know that there are going to be a lot of questions going forward. So this concept of the drill, which I actually attribute to a colleague of mine, Mil Werbeloff, is a wonderful metaphor for qualitative research, which means drilling down, really drilling down to find the meaning of the findings. And you're going to see, in contrast, there's a different metaphor that I've included here for quantitative research. You'll see that a little bit further on. So qualitative research is, sorry, this is just going too fast. Okay. Qualitative research is really focusing on a small, purposeful sampling of individuals to try and better understand their experiences. You'll see that quantitative research has a very different approach, where we use random sampling with a much, much larger sample to generalize to the broader population. So qualitative research is a smaller sample of individuals, as this picture illustrates. The emphasis is on exploration, discovery, and description. Triangulation addresses trustworthiness by making use of multiple sources and methods. And the goal is not to produce truths or facts that can be generalized, but rather for readers to decide for themselves whether the study's findings can in any way apply to their own settings and contexts. And this concept is known as transferability. Transferability is one of the 4 trustworthiness criteria, along with credibility, confirmability, and dependability, which we're going to be getting to in a few moments. Qualitative research draws on multiple methods of data collection and involves multiple data sources. The methods can include individual interviews, observation, focus groups, critical incident questionnaires, documents, and imagery review, and also open-ended surveys. Triangulation is critical in attempting to obtain an in-depth understanding of the study, and if triangulation is achieved, this adds greatly to the credibility of the study and the study's findings. This is a little bit about qualitative data analysis, and I'm just going to touch, I'm not going to read all of this because you also will be getting a copy of this recording after the presentation. I imagine sometime tomorrow, Emily will be sending it out, and you'll be able to read this in more depth. But basically, data analysis is an iterative process. It's not a fixed or linear process. Analysis, analytic strategies include thematic analysis, content analysis, and the main feature of any of these strategies is the focus on data condensation or data reduction. Analysis can be manual or software can be used. Data condensation and reduction is achieved by inductively developing codes from the raw data. And from groups of codes, the researcher then develops themes which become the study's findings. The researcher then has to go on to interpret what the findings mean. And even if one is using a software for your analysis, the software cannot do the interpretation. Only a human being can do that. And I want to just be very clear about that. So software can organize, sort, and code the data, can even sort the codes into themes, but it cannot give you what the data actually mean. Obviously, with artificial intelligence, maybe that is a possibility these days, but as a researcher, the responsibility is really yours to determine what the meaning is of your study's findings. And then findings are then reported in a manner that is consistent with whatever design you're using. Thick description, which is a term coined by Geertz in 1973, is the way that we describe the data by using verbatim quotations from our participants. Remember, we use participants' actual words We do not change anything that they say. We don't paraphrase what they say. We literally transcribe verbatim and present exactly what they say, word for word. So with that in mind, let's take a look on the other side of the coin, which is quantitative research. So whereas qualitative is drilling down deep to really understand the meaning of the study's findings, quantitative is more like plowing the field of inquiry. It's a much broader approach. You have a much, much larger sample of people that have been randomly sampled rather than purposefully selected. And so you're really trying to generalize from that very large sample to a much smaller, you're trying to generalize from your sample to a much larger population out there, and generalizability is the goal, where it is not the goal in qualitative. As we said, transferability is what one strives for. So this picture really just describes the difference between what I showed you earlier with that small research sample with a handful of people. In quantitative research, we have a much, much larger sample of individuals. We don't go as in-depth into all of their experiences as we do with qualitative research. We're rather looking for generalizations and norms. So quantitative is a scientific approach where we test hypotheses, we describe and explain phenomena, we explore and confirm models of constructs, we generalize from samples to populations. Rigorous objective methods must be used, and the way of analysis, the analytic method, is deductive rather than inductive. And the main goal is to generalize from your sample, which is very big to begin with, to an even larger target population out there of humans and groups of people that is way bigger than your sample. So quantitative research draws specifically on objective methods of data collection. The methods include closed-ended surveys and questionnaires and experimentation. What I mean by closed-ended as opposed to open-ended, which is used in qualitative research, is that just a simple yes or no answer would suffice, whereas in qualitative, the questions are more open-ended to really get people's perceptions and let them explain in their own words what they mean in response to a particular question. And again, triangulation is not a concern in quantitative research as it is in qualitative. Quantitative data also involves first-generation techniques and second-generation techniques. First-generation techniques are simple descriptive analysis, correlations, analysis of variance, ANOVA, exploratory factor analysis, cluster analysis, multidimensional scaling, logistic regression, multiple regression, confirmatory factor analysis, etc. Second-generation techniques overcome the weakness of first-generation techniques. They're much more sophisticated in terms of model testing and model building. They're based on a structural equation modeling. They incorporate unobserved or latent variables. These account for measurement error in observed variables. They build and test complex networks of relationships, and they also examine causal relationships. As you can see, quantitative analysis is very rigorous in its own right. As qualitative analysis was in terms of coding and thematic analysis, this is rigorous in a very different way, but not any less rigorous nonetheless. So both of the approaches, qualitative and quantitative, have different ways of collecting data, different ways of forming a sample, and different ways of analyzing the data. Now, bear in mind, with a mixed method study, you need to know all of this. And I just want to leave it at that for now. I see some people smiling, but yeah, that's the reality. So let's move on further and see how this all plays out if mixed methods is something you're considering doing for your dissertation research. So again, this is just an image that explains all the different ways of collecting and reporting quantitative data. It's very much numerically oriented as opposed to narrative oriented in the case of qualitative research. Graphs, tables, mapping, statistical procedures are really very much part of quantitative analysis. Statistical analysis methods, it's essential for researchers to understand data and relationships, and the methods for statistical analysis have expanded considerably in recent years. There's a lot of talk about simultaneously analyzing multiple variables. There are more sophisticated multivariate methods. And all of these allow an understanding of complex relationships. So if you are a stats person or you're a quantitative researcher, I'm sure you are aware of what I'm talking about here. And a lot has developed, especially with these second generation techniques in recent years. So if you're considering a mixed method study, you are really looking at a study from two very different vantage points. As you can see, qualitative and quantitative methodologies are very different on all levels. So a thoughtful and robust use of mixed methods requires meeting the standards of both quantitative and qualitative research methodology in the following stages: in the study design, in the way you set up the study, in the research implementation, in the way you go about conducting your research, and also in the reporting of findings, the way that you present your research findings. So you have to address the rigor and the robustness of both methodologies in your study at all the different levels: the design, implementation, and the findings, reporting findings. Data collection and data analysis are based on underlying theoretical or conceptual frameworks, and this applies to both qualitative and quantitative research. And if you're doing mixed methods, you do not only have to address trustworthiness, which applies to qualitative research, but you also have to address rigor, which applies to quantitative. So this includes 8 criteria. So all 8 criteria must be ensured. And I see people smiling, because the complexity of this becomes evident when you look at it full on for what it really is, mixed methodology. So all 8 criteria must be ensured. Mixed methods is thus much more complex than either qualitative or quantitative research, because you have to take into account, and in the dark blue are the qualitative: credibility, confirmability, dependability, and transferability. But you also cannot forget, by the wayside, the internal validity, objectivity, reliability, and generalizability that characterize quantitative. So there are your 8 criteria. They have to be satisfied, all 8 of them, in your one study. So now that we've gone over qualitative and quantitative, and I felt it was really just important to have those brief overviews, to have it fresh in our minds, what each of these methodology bring to the table and what the requirements are. Now what we're going to do is go more head on into the mixed methods designs themselves. So mixed methods is a multi-design methodology. As you can see, there are 2 designs going on, qualitative and quantitative. The field is growing and evolving all the time. Various mixed methods designs have emerged in the literature, and these help inform the procedures used in conducting studies. Research designs are essentially themselves procedures for collecting, analyzing, and reporting data. And all research designs have distinct names and procedures associated with them. We cannot make these up, and there really is no such thing as a generic design. We do have something called descriptive case study in qualitative research, but generic is not a research design. Please bear that in mind. So once the researcher has identified that their research problem calls for a mixed method study, or you think it calls for a mixed method study, the next step is to try to determine the specific research design that will fit best with your study's problem, purpose, and research questions. And remember, you have to choose a qualitative and a quantitative design, because you're using both methodologies in your one study. So according to Cheek and Obi, sorry, that needs an ampersand, I'll add it in. According to Cheek and Obi 2023, a key consideration when thinking through the design of your mixed method study relates to when the various components that make up the design will be undertaken in the study. This is a consideration related to the relative timing or pacing. So we've already seen timing and pacing, integration, and so we're going to start seeing a lot of these concepts bubble up, which are necessary to understand mixed methods and to really ensure that you are, in fact, doing a proper and authentic mixed method study, not just that egg beater effect of beating up the 2 methods and thinking that you've combined something, which is not mixed methods.
Dr. Bloomberg?
Yes.
Would it be okay, before we move forward, are you able to let us know again? There was a slide with the 8 criteria slide. Are you able to explain one more time which 4 are qualitative again?
Sure. The qualitative are in the dark blue. Those are credibility,
Thank you,
confirmability, dependability, and transferability. Transferability, remember we said, is the reader's determination of whether the findings of a particular study will apply to their own context or setting. A researcher cannot establish transferability. They can provide rich, thick description, and through that, the reader will make the choice of whether the study will apply to their context or setting. So the four that are qualitative are credibility, confirmability, dependability, and transferability, and the ones in the aqua color, the turquoise, are the quantitative, the internal validity, objectivity, reliability, and generalizability.
Thank
Who
you.
would like to write in the chat, yes or no? Does objectivity only apply to quantitative research?
Does objectivity only apply to quantitative research? Yes or no?
And Emily can just tell me, is there is the answer yes or no, or there's some both?
So far, I have a no. I have a yes. I have a yes.
Okay, so let me just put everyone
It's
out of
mixed.
misery. Okay, objectivity does not apply to qualitative research. Qualitative research does not claim to be objective, nor does it strive to be objective. Qualitative research acknowledges that the researcher is a human being that can never be fully objective, who is subjective in their approach to life. We all carry with us our assumptions, our biases, even our prejudices. And the main goal of qualitative research is not, as I say, to strive for objectivity, as in the case of quantitative, but rather to be transparent about our subjectivity through declaring our positionality and declaring what we assume to be true. So that is the big difference. Objectivity does not apply to qualitative research. That was just a little question. Now we can move forward. Okay. So we spoke a little bit about the overview of mixed methods. And now we're drilling down even deeper, because as with qualitative research and quantitative research, you have their own specific established research designs. In qualitative, remember, there's case study, phenomenology, ethnography, narrative inquiry, not generic. And then in quantitative research, there's experimental, quasi-experimental, convergent, etc. But in mixed methods, there are four main designs. And this is something that a lot of people I know are not fully aware of. And that's why I thought that today's presentation was really useful in laying out what these four designs require if one is doing a mixed method study. And these are the four: convergent, parallel; embedded, which is qualitative or quantitative dominant. There are two different types you can do there. Then there's explanatory sequential and exploratory sequential. And I'm going to go through each of these four now so that you really have a good idea of what I'm talking about. So the first is the convergent. I'm sorry, I know you can't see that, but I have like a big section on my screen here that's blocking my view. Convergent parallel, which is the first design, is a single phase design. Quantitative data collection and analysis occurs. Qualitative data collection and analysis occurs. Then the researcher merges the results, facilitating triangulation. And remember, triangulation is getting data and also analyzing data from different perspectives. And then what the researcher will do is compare quantitative and qualitative results and interpret the findings. So that is the convergent parallel design. That is the first mixed methods design that is spoken about and explained in the literature. The key assumption is that quantitative and qualitative data provide, sorry, I've just got to move something here again. Qualitative and quantitative data provide different types of information, and together these yield results that should be the same. The caveat is that although it's a single phase approach, the convergent design can be complex because the number of data collection and analysis activities occurring concurrently is in itself something to really watch for. And this may require follow-up procedures to understand divergence in the results. So even though it's a single phase design, it does carry a lot of skill associated with it because of these caveats, because there are so many data points of data collection and data analysis occurring concurrently. So that is the first design. The second mixed methods design that is spoken about in the literature is called the embedded design. And this can happen in two ways. There can be a single phase design, which is quantitatively dominant, but there's also a single phase embedded design that is qualitatively dominant. And I'm going to show both of these to you now. So let's look at the first one, which is the quantitatively dominant design. First, quantitative data collection and analysis occurs, and data collection analysis, this is a repeat, but data collection and analysis occurs. The researcher analyzes primary and secondary data to address primary and secondary research questions. And the researcher then interprets the results, which are embedded in the design. These are the primary results. So this we're talking about here is a single phase design that is quantitatively dominant. This, as I said, is a one-phase approach. The researcher collects mostly quantitative data and a lesser amount of qualitative data from every participant and analyzes both sets of data. For example, while carrying out a large survey, a subset of participants may be interviewed to augment the researcher's understanding of an important concept measured in the survey. So the main feature in this design is quantitative. It's quantitatively dominant. A large survey is set out, and then the researcher interviews a smaller number of people to shed more light on a particular aspect of findings that emanate from that survey. So can you see the survey is the main method, and the interview which is qualitative, is a secondary method, because in this design, quantitative is dominant, not qualitative. You're going to see in a minute there's going to be a switch where there's a design where qualitative is dominant and the quantitative aspect is secondary. The key assumption here is that quantitative and qualitative data are complementary, and the dominant quantitative data addresses the primary research question, and the secondary qualitative data addresses the secondary or lesser important or lesser significant research questions. So this is our second design, which has two versions. This was version A. Now we have version B, which is qualitatively dominant. So this is the embedded design with a qualitative dominant focus. Also, similar to the quantitatively dominant one, this is a single phase approach or one phase approach. The researcher collects mostly qualitative data and a smaller amount of quantitative data from every participant and analyzes both sets of data. For example, while carrying out in-depth interviews, which is qualitative, participants are also asked to complete a quantitative questionnaire. And these quantitative data provide the researcher with some objective data, whereas the interviews are more subjective data. So can you see here how the qualitative is the most important focus in this design, and the quantitative collection and analysis is secondary? That interview or questionnaire, the questionnaire or survey is secondary to the in-depth interviews. So this is a flip of what I just showed you with the quantitative dominant. This is just in reverse. The key assumption, again, is that quantitative and qualitative data are complementary. The dominant qualitative data addresses the primary research questions, and the secondary quantitative data addresses the secondary research questions. So you see the difference in focus in the embedded design, whether one is choosing the qualitative dominant or the quantitative dominant. The researcher has a different focus for a specific reason. Remember, you're not just going to go and choose one of these without having a reason for doing so. So there has to be a clear rationale for why you're doing the embedded design and why you're choosing what you're choosing to be primary, either qualitative or quantitative. Then we have the third design. So remember, the first one was the sequential. The second one was the embedded. Now we have the explanatory sequential, which is a two-phase design. In phase one, quantitative data collection and analysis occurs. The researcher identifies results for follow-up. And then in phase two, qualitative data collection and analysis occurs. And then the researcher has to interpret the results in terms of both qualitative and quantitative perspectives. So you can see that this is a two-phase study, which is basically like two separate studies in one, phase one and then phase two. So this is the explanatory sequential. And here is an example. The researcher first conducts quantitative research, then analyzes these quantitative results, and then builds on the results to explain them in more detail with the qualitative research. The qualitative phase is implemented for the purpose of explaining the initial quantitative results in more depth, and the qualitative data help explain the quantitative results. So you see that it's not just conducting two separate phases, but you have to use them in conjunction with each other to help support each other. The main goal, it's not like you're doing a qualitative study and a quantitative study. It's one study, but your purpose is to integrate those results with the qualitative explaining the quantitative or vice versa. And once the qualitative phase is complete, the researcher integrates the two sets of results and draws conclusions about how the qualitative results explain and extend specific quantitative results. And then, of course, both sets of data, qualitative and quantitative, must be integrated and synthesized so that the study is a holistic piece of work and not just a set of disparate parts. And this goes back to what we spoke about in the beginning. The goal is that the sum is greater than the sum is greater than the parts. So the end goal is an integrated, holistic explanation based on two very different types of data collection and data analysis, but with the purpose of integrating them so that the one explains or supports the other. So this is explanatory sequential, example 1. Now let's look at example 2 for the same explanatory sequential. Here, a researcher first conducts qualitative research, then analyzes these qualitative results, and then builds on the results to explain them in more depth with the quantitative research. The quantitative phase, which is second, is implemented for the purpose of explaining the initial qualitative results. So here the qualitative would come first, and the quantitative data help explain the qualitative results. And once the quantitative phase is complete, the researcher integrates the two sets of results and draws conclusions about how the quantitative results explain and extend specific qualitative results. But again, both sets of data must be fully integrated and synthesized for this to be a rigorous study. It's not like two separate studies. The sum is greater, the sum of the whole or the sum is greater than the parts. And then finally, the fourth design that we look at is called the exploratory sequential design. And again, this is also a two-phase design. In phase 1, qualitative data collection and analysis occurs. The researcher applies codes and identifies themes. And then in phase 2, the quantitative test, the researcher quantitatively tests the feature designed in the qualitative study. And, sorry, I just again have to move this, and interprets the results to produce a fully authentic synthesis. The description of this design is that the researcher and the research problem are more qualitatively oriented. So this design starts with a more inductive approach, which is typical of qualitative research. The research problem and the purpose call for the qualitative strand to have greater emphasis within the design. So the qualitative is a much stronger strand. The researcher starts with a collection and analysis of qualitative data, followed by translating the qualitative findings into an approach that is tested quantitatively. So you can see there's a lot of skill involved here. The researcher will need to know how to do a full qualitative analysis and then test those findings quantitatively. And as with the explanatory design, remember this is the exploratory design, as with the explanatory design where we had the quantitative and qualitative dominant options, the intent here is that the results of the first qualitative method can help develop or inform the second quantitative method. So, in a qualitative design, in a mixed methods design, the qualitative phase involves all of these following activities. There's purposeful sampling. The sample size has to be determined because generalizability is not the goal, rather transferability is. Data collection has to be based on specific data collection tools that are used in qualitative research, such as interviews, focus groups, open-ended surveys, critical incidents, observation, etc. And then data analysis has to follow strict qualitative protocols, including coding and thematic analysis, coding schemes, etc. So this is what has to be taken care of on the qualitative side of the house. But while that's all happening, the quantitative side of the house has to be taken care of as well. And remember, when I say taken care of, all of this has to be known and understood, and the skills have to be developed before you start the study, because no one wants to land in the middle of a study and then not know how to do something. not know how to collect data adequately with the methods that are required, or not know how to analyze data once you've already got huge voluminous amounts of data and not know what to do with them. So there's a lot of learning, a huge learning curve that would be required to do this mixed method study, doubly so than if one was doing a qualitative or quantitative method. And I'll go back again to that egg beater metaphor. It's not just a matter of beating up stuff. It's much, much more systematic than that. I just would like a show of hands. Would anyone disagree with me on that? And I'm happy to be challenged. No one? Okay. I'm really, really not trying to overwhelm anyone either. I'm trying to be very realistic, because at the end of this, I want people to decide for themselves whether mixed methods is something they would consider for their dissertation research. And that really is the goal and objective of today's presentation. Only you as the student researcher can decide, or faculty that are here, can decide whether your students are well set up for a mixed method study in terms of the rigor that's required. So in the quantity, we just covered what would be required in the qualitative phase. I'll just go back a second because I was talking about other stuff. But in the qualitative phase, we took care of the way samples are developed, sample size, data collection, and data analysis. Then with regard quantitative, in the same way, we have to look at the way data is collected through surveys, questionnaires, has to be integrated with conceptual and theoretical frameworks as in qualitative. The sampling is probability sampling because we need to generalize to the research population, and then different methods can be used to collect data such as survey, etc. And then remember, as we discussed previously, sorry, I just want to go back, there are very specific ways of analyzing quantitative data. And as you saw, there are first generation and second generation techniques. So again, working with your dissertation chair would be the best way to go forward in terms of selecting the methods, what is appropriate, what is within my skill set, what is needed for the study, and what is essential. And so these are all questions one would be asking your dissertation committee, specifically your dissertation chair, when you are trying to decide whether the mixed methods methodology is something that you should be considering for your study.
Dr. Bloomberg?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Emily.
I was just going to say there's just a few questions, and I was hoping maybe it would be a good time to just...
Yes, this is a good time. Can you just tell me what the time is?
Yes, it's 45, so we have about 15 minutes.
I just want to be sure that I am on track here because I did not have my phone with me.
That's okay. That's okay. Are you sure it's okay? There's just a few that popped up.
This is a good time to stop.
Okay. So people had some questions in the Q&A. I'm going to go ahead and start with the Q&A. So forgive me, this is going back to, I believe, population size. So what is the difference of size of the people taking the survey versus those interviewed in version A? It was several slides back. Do you know what this is in reference to?
I'm going to just say, instead of getting into the very minutiae of the details of each of these designs, I'm rather going to stay away from that because a lot is written about it. I would love to be able to discuss all the ins and outs, but we just don't have the time for it in this presentation. I struggled with that when I was developing this presentation. There are so many intricacies, but a dissertation chair should have enough expertise in either qualitative or quantitative or both to assist and guide students with those kind of details. There are very specific texts written on like data saturation, what is an adequate sample size to achieve saturation, and all these things. So there are like lots of different intricacies that I haven't mentioned here just because of timing.
Okay.
But please understand that all of those questions are excellent, and those are the kind of questions you should be thinking about in determining what is the best methodology for your study.
Thank you. And then again, this is just in terms of the best methodology, excuse me. Would you be able to share some examples of studies using the different methods you've mentioned? I would like to give you a moment to respond to that, but I'm thinking maybe this might be a great comment to add a thread in the comments. Maybe we could get some examples from...
Yes, that's a wonderful... Sorry, is the person asking about examples of qualitative studies, quantitative studies, and mixed method studies, or actual methods of data collection?
The question is, would you be able to share some examples of studies using the different methods you mentioned? I think it's in relation to the methods you've chatted about.
So remember, methods can be methods of sampling, methods of data collection, or methods of
May I
analysis.
clarify?
Dr. Thompson, go ahead. Yes, please.
Yeah, so you mentioned there are a number of different types of mixed method studies that are available. So what I wanted to do is get a sense for how, examples for each, so it gives you a sense of how they played out in terms of applying those methods.
Are you referring, Dr. Thompson, to the different designs? So
Yeah,
like
the different
sequential
mixed method studies that you covered. You covered version A and the different types.
those are the four main mixed methods designs. And yes, I think we can continue that discussion to look at certain examples. I can also bring in a colleague of mine at some point, Dr. Werbeloff, who's done a lot of work and writing in this area, because she's very, very familiar with the different designs that you're referring to. And yes, it would be very interesting to have some examples. What I just try to show on the slides and the time that we have available are the different steps that one would take. First, you do this, then you do that, then you have to do this kind of thing.
Yes.
I only gave a few examples of, like, first you interview people and then you would do a survey on a few of them, but I didn't give as many examples as I could have given the time restriction. But that's an excellent question.
Yeah,
excellent question, and we'll definitely revisit that in the coming days.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that question. And just so you are aware, Dr. Bloomberg, we have about 10 minutes, so I don't know how much more content we have, and then we can go back into some of the questions. You let me know.
Yeah, okay. Sure. Let me continue, and I will probably only need like another 5 to 6 minutes.
Okay.
So here's a checklist, and I hope that those of you who will be considering mixed methods will look at a checklist like this if you have considered doing a mixed method study. So these are kind of some of the questions that one will be asking if you have done the study. This is a checklist for after you've done the study. Did you include a basic definition of mixed methods? Are the reasons for using both qualitative and quantitative data provided? Does the reader have a sense of the potential use of the mixed methods research? Have you identified the rationale for choosing the mixed methods design in the first place? Remember, if you are considering mixed methods, you would have to stipulate in your dissertation why you're choosing mixed methods, for what reasons, as opposed to qualitative or quantitative. Also, is the specific mixed methods design identified and explained? Remember, those are the four that I spoke about: the sequential, the exploratory, the explanatory, etc. The 4 of those. And remember, there are actually more than 4. There are 6 because one of them had a qualitative and a quantitative component to them. I think that's 5. Are the procedures of data collection and data analysis clearly outlined? Are all analytic procedures explained? That means, have you explained all of your qualitative and quantitative analytic steps that you took? Are the procedures for validation, which applies to quantitative, and trustworthiness, which applies to qualitative, explained? Remember, there are 8 criteria that you have to take care of: 4 for qualitative and 4 for quantitative if you're doing a mixed method study. Have you adequately synthesized your study's findings? That's a very important point. So you're not just conducting 2 separate or parallel studies, but you're conducting one integrated, synthesized study where the qualitative and the quantitative data are integrated in such a way that they either support or don't support each other. And have you integrated your synthesis with your study's theoretical or conceptual framework? So those are all considerations for a checklist if you have already conducted a mixed method study or you're in the process of doing so. Now just 2 or 3 more slides that I had to put in here is, so here we have, and I thought it was only fair to add this. What's going on, Emily? I don't know. Okay. I thought it only fair and transparent of me to add this because mixed methods is not highly recommended for dissertation research here at National and at many other universities, for the simple reason that it is so complex and requires a lot of time and skill. So I just want to be very clear that the thrust of today's presentation was to illustrate the complexity of this methodology and let students know what would be required to conduct an authentic mixed method study, but also clearly pointing out the challenges of attempting a mixed methods dissertation. And I hope that that came through in the way that I've tried to be transparent. I love mixed methods, an amazingly complex way of examining data from two different points of view, but it does require a lot. And so these are all the points that I really want to end on. Hold on, just want to move that again. Mixed methods is not always suited to dissertation research because of the time and complexity involved. Please be aware of the differences in the way the various research designs can be set up. Those are the 4 that are covered. Decisions about how methods might be mixed and why they are mixed must be justified in relation to a specific research problem. Just having more methods does not necessarily provide a fuller or deeper answer to the research problem. And Cheek and Obi, again, in this book that's just come out, speak about this. It's not just a matter of adding method after method after method and thinking that that will add to the depth of the finding. It's not how many data collection methods you have, but how you integrate your findings and results. Remember, findings typically applies to qualitative research and results typically apply to quantitative. So if you're considering a mixed method study, please take into account all of the following considerations: your study's purpose, your research skills as a researcher, the complexity of the design, the time frame required to conduct a study given the parameters of dissertation research, in what ways will your specific design enable you to achieve the goals of the research? Remember, those are the 4 research designs that we covered. And how will you account for differences, different research paradigms? And this is a very important question. If you're doing a mixed method study, how will you account for different research paradigms, since qualitative and quantitative research is based on vastly different philosophical and epistemological underpinnings and assumptions? And this requires a high level of skill, knowledge, and expertise on the part of the researcher. Green, 2007, who writes a lot about mixed methods, refers to the researcher's mental model. So what is your mental model? If you're doing a mixed method study, quantitative is based on positivist and post-positivist paradigms, whereas qualitative is based on constructivist and critical theory paradigms. And how are you, as a human being, going to bring together those two vastly different ideas and philosophies into your one single study? So I just would like everybody to be aware of these caveats and these, not warnings, but points of consideration when you are considering what type of study to do. And with that, these are the references which will be included in the presentation. A lot of this material actually comes from my book, which covers mixed methods as well, and is now in a 5th edition. And we now have 5 minutes for questions and discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Bloomberg. A couple of questions in the chat that we have some time for. So with Convergent, the primary research questions are both qualitative and quantitative, correct? Question mark.
Let's go to the Convergent. Convergent
Yes.
parallel is that qualitative, well, firstly, this is what you do. You collect your data separately, then this triangulation, and then this facilitates triangulation, and then you compare your quantitative and qualitative findings. And these are the key assumptions. And there's a caveat: just because it's a single phase approach does not mean that it's not complex. And so, sorry, can you just give me that question again?
No problem. Yeah. Now that we're here. So with Convergent, the primary research questions are both qualitative and quantitative?
Yeah, both qualitative and quantitative, because remember, you're first conducting like a mini quantitative data analysis and collection, which is based on your quantitative questions and hypotheses. And then you're conducting qualitative data analysis and collection, which has its own set of research questions that are open-ended, being qualitative, and then you're merging these findings. So yes, 2 sets of research questions.
Thank you.
And this actually applies to all of mixed methods. That's an excellent question. There are always 2 sets of research questions because you're integrating qualitative and quantitative methodologies, and both of them have their own way of setting up research questions. As you know, qualitative has open-ended research questions. Quantitative has fixed research questions with hypotheses.
And thank you so much, Dr. Bloomberg. With the explanatory sequential, this question came up earlier in tonight's session, so I want to make sure I can kind of circle back to it.
Okay.
But And again, it has to do with sample size. So we'll see if we're gonna dive into that portion here. But with explanatory sequential, would the sample sizes and participants be the same for both phases of the study?
No, you have to have a quantitative sample and a qualitative sample. And with a quantitative sample, you apply quantitative methods, and the qualitative sample, you apply qualitative methods. You're, in essence, conducting two separate studies, but bringing them together. That's the skill and expertise involved in all of mixed methods, that you're not just mixing up. You're conducting very thoughtfully, systematically set up studies, one qualitative and one quantitative, and then bringing them together through integration.
Thank you. And as I mentioned, that was further, that question was asked further, or excuse me, much earlier. So I'm glad we, I'm glad we revisited the idea of that. So this is a good, just an interesting comment. And of course, I feel like you've outlined the skill and the time that would go into a mixed methods for consideration. But if the purpose of a dissertation work is to learn how to conduct rigorous research, wouldn't mixed methods be a great way for a student to learn both approaches? Is this question?
Absolutely. It's a great way to learn both approaches. And that's why it's not completely ruled out. If one is up to learning both approaches and developing both skill sets for qualitative and quantitative, and your dissertation chair is has expertise in both, then no one is saying don't do mixed methods. It's just a matter of being aware of some of the challenges in using this. But no, if one has a research problem that would require qualitative and quantitative findings to really fully understand that problem, then this may be something to consider.
And I know that some people are interested in seeing examples of mixed methods. One of my recommendations would be going to ProQuest and seeing if you can do some searches for mixed method dissertations.
That's an excellent idea. ProQuest will bring up dissertations from this year going back 20 years, depending on your search parameters, and you can see what type of problems have been researched through mixed methods. And that's a great way of doing it. Instead of like making up examples, is to look for actual examples where students or researchers have conducted research using mixed methods approaches.
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, I noticed a few different times people had asked for examples, and I would just make that recommendation. And then, of course, Dr. Bloomberg has always welcomed having these types of conversations in the Commons, and the Graduate Studies Support Center. We'd like to be able to support those questions as well too. So if something comes up and you're like, hey, I'd like a specific example, we can help guide you to the right area so that you can do some research and find some more answers as researchers in your field. Dr. Bloomberg, any closing comments at this time before we wrap up?
Not really, other than just to thank you, Emily, as always, for your time and the space in facilitating these rich discussions, which I always learn a lot from participants' questions, and also just going over the material again, like always seeing it with a different set of eyes. And I've learned a lot in developing this webinar and a previous one that I actually presented with Dr. Werbeloff for Sage Method Space a few months ago on mixed methods. And so I've learned a lot in developing these presentations because I am much more of a qualitative researcher than a quantitative. And so I've had to learn a lot about quantitative research in order to fully understand this, mixed methods. So that's been a useful experience for me. So I hope that people found this useful, and I hope that you'll take away a lot of insights into making this determination of whether this methodology is in fact suitable and viable for your dissertation research. And if not, then you have two amazing methodologies at your fingertips, qualitative or quantitative. So also, if one is fascinated with mixed methods, as a lot of people are, even I am, there are also opportunities to use this for studies following your dissertation. So it doesn't mean that if you do a qualitative or quantitative dissertation, there are still opportunities in the future to apply this and to try this out. So, think about what best suits your needs within the time frame that you have available to do the research and what's required and the skills that would be needed.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Bloomberg. I couldn't have said it any better there at the end. Again, we encourage you to utilize your resources as a student at National University. If you do have follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to our office. And as always, Dr. Bloomberg, thank you so much for coming to take the time to come and present. Until the next time, I hope everyone has a great rest of your evening.